Chief of Defence Staff. Aiming to usher in reforms in the higher defence management, central government has approved the creation of the post of Chief of Defence Staff and Department of Military Affairs within the Ministry of Defence. CDS will be a 4-star officer and act as principal military advisor to Defence Minister on all tri-services matters. In addition to heading the Department of Military Affairs, the CDS will also be the permanent chairman of the Chiefs of Staff Committee. However, CDS will not exercise any military command, including over 3 service chiefs. So to further understand the role and responsibilities of the CDS and its implications on defence management, we have with us a distinguished panel of guests today. Let me first introduce the guests to you, beginning with retired Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni, who is with us here in the studio. We are also joined by retired AS Vice Marshal Manmohan Bahadur and retired Rear Admiral Sudarshan Shrikhande. We also have with us Mr. Ajay Banerjee, the defence correspondent of the Tribune, in the studio. Let me begin with you, General Kulkarni, and let's begin with the proposal which was made almost 2 decades ago after the Kargil war by the KRC, that's the Kargil Review Committee, and it has taken 2 decades, but finally we will be having a CDS. So how significant is that? We'll come to the mandate also, but the significance of having a Chief of Defence Staff.
See, if you see the combat security environment, you see the comprehensive national power if you want to use it. If we are looking at India becoming the 3rd largest economy in the world, we have the 4th largest defense forces in the world, we are modernized to an extent, we have adversaries. Now, having said that, there was definitely a need now to be able to create that jointness. Now, you can be excellent, you can have individually be brilliant, but jointly you can actually excel and be able to do what you are being destined to do. Now, let's see the jointness part. Even if you have an excellent armed forces comprising the 3 services with all its potentials, but where to utilize, how to utilize, and who else could be a better person than a one single point advisor to the government to be able to state that, well, if this is what you are required to do, these are the resources available to us, and we would be able to do it in a manner in which it is stated. Having said that, now you realize that in today's world, resources are limited. They aren't that we could dream of, but knowing how we all are as an economy, the resources are limited. If the resources are limited, how well to utilize those resources and to get bang for the buck? There couldn't be better one principal advisor. Now, there were occasions when probably people felt that people in the realm of decision making may not be able to understand the concept of it. So you have now the Department of Military Affairs headed by the CDS, under whom are the 3 services. As you rightly said, he has no military command over them. So the command, the operational command remains with the chief, but he becomes the principal advisor to the Raksha Mantri. Now we have the Nuclear Command Authority. He also is the military advisor to the PM-led Nuclear Command Authority. So you see that overall, a person who's been in service for so long is the first amongst the equals. He's also a 4-star general as anybody else is. And therefore, he commands respect. He knows the terrain. He knows how to use the doctrines that are required to be. And he also knows when to use it and how best to use the comprehensive national power that now he has got. And in that context, I look at it that CDS, much that it was required, it was being debated over the years, it has taken 20 years, you rightly said, from Kargil Review Committee headed by Mr. Subramaniam, whose son today is the Minister of External Affairs. You have had the Naresh Kumar Committee, you had the Shekatkar Committee. Each of these committees have been, we have deliberated over it for years together and felt that in today's environment, if the resources have to be used well, there are commonalities in terms of training, in terms of operations, in terms of logistics, in terms of maintenance, in terms of so many GSQRs which have to be common amongst all of them. And therefore, a CDS would be one principal advisor, and the purple community, as what is we all are known as, would be a beneficiary, the nation would be a beneficiary, and there would be no wasteful resources.
So jointness is the underlying thing. Let me bring in the officers from other 2 services here as well who are joining us on the show. Rear Admiral Sudarshan Shrikhande is joining us from Goa. Admiral Shrikande, your views on how this will bring a change in that jointness of, ensuring that there is a close cooperation and collaborative efforts made by all three forces.
Thank you, Mr. Taya. Yes, I think this is a very important reformative step that has been taken. That it has been long in coming is now water under the bridge. But let's look ahead from here. In the mandate given to the CDS, there is certainly talk about the output, jointness as an output. And here I would like to suggest, looking at a slightly different framework that I've written about, and that is we should consider integration as an input and jointness as an output. We have for too long been considering, jointness as an input itself. And as a result, in our armed forces, we have had more joint training than any other armed forces anywhere else in the world, including professional military education. But it is not translated into jointness because we fundamentally have sort of postponed looking at jointness as an output. That, I think, is now going to change. The mandate of the chief of the CDS in terms of looking ahead, as General Kulkarni brought out, in terms of the Strategic Forces Command, in terms of being the principal military advisor. And here I would like to suggest that we should stick to the term principal military advisor because there is really no intent to make any individual as a single point military advisor. Although the advice does flow into the organization which he represents. However, he remains the principal military advisor. In fact, the Goldwater-Nichols Act very clearly uses the term principal military advisor. Nobody else uses the term single point military advisor, even if it comes from an individual. But that aside, eventually one of the jobs that the CDS has been tasked is to create the architectures for the joint commands. Which will be geographic commands. In a manner of speaking, they will look after certain theaters. And in those joint commands, we will then find ultimately warfighting jointness as an output.
Okay.
Here, I would like to say that as an initial step, I think the mandate for the CDS is in keeping with leveraging the current systems and transforming them into the modifications that are required as we go along. In doing so, I think some reasonable steps are being taken. They are not very large steps, but they are important steps. Okay. They are not very small steps either, because as I've commented somewhere earlier, that if you take very small steps, then there is always, some vested interest which might show that these were not required or these don't work. So we are now well looking into the future. And in terms of, therefore, the CDS's tenures, I would like to say here that by the end of about 6 years, that is the tenures of 2 CDSs, we should probably have all the joint commands in place. And that is where, as I see from even the press release, the PIB release that has come out, I do feel that the government intends this to be a major first step. Okay. But this is not the final step. And eventually, in terms of the joint war-fighting output that I talked about, the CDS would probably need to transit to exercising military command. Okay. And the individual service chiefs, and another 6 or 8 years or whatever time frame, would go into the very important roles and concentrate on raise, train, and sustain. Okay. Which means that acquisitions, etc., having been worked out in a cohesive manner, would then be actualized by single services who will monitor the contracts, look after the indigenization details, and come up with the instruments that the joint commanders and the CDS will provide the nation's political establishment.
Okay, so there is, a major first step, as Admiral Shrikande is pointing out. Let me bring in AVM Bahadur here. AVM Bahadur, your viewpoints in terms of, obviously, both the gentlemen have pointed out how integration, jointness is the core theme, and this is the first major step. But if you look at the mandate which has been given to the CDS, once appointed, how would you look at it being affecting the overall the purpose of bringing in those reforms which you've been talking about for long?
We have to think slightly bigger in the sense that the mandate for the defense of the nation still with the Department of Defense. Now, under the Raksha Mantri, in a way, when you see the hierarchical chart, this is this fifth department which has been formed, bringing the CDS as the head. And he's looking into all the military affairs. And if you go to the website of the Ministry of Defense, you will realize that the first few responsibilities of the DoD have been transferred from the Defense Secretary to the Department of Military Affairs under the CDS, which includes the procurements for the defense services.
Okay.
Now the point, I will come to that a little later, but the point at issue is that the mandate is still with the Department of Defense. And the CDS has now been given the charge of procurement other than capital acquisitions. That is the PIB release. Now that's a big dichotomy because you expect the CDS to prioritize between the three services, which is good. Hence, there will be some action on the way the Army, Navy, Air Force will fight jointly or meet the challenges in future. But the wherewithal of that is still with the Defense Secretary because under him is the DG acquisition. The DG acquisition has not been put under the Department of Military Affairs in the Department of Military Affairs. Now, the point at issue is if we have taken this step, this is a major thing of ensuring that you get the bang for the buck. So, if we continue like this for too long, maybe this is the first step, as Admiral Srikhande and others have pointed out. Very nice. But this is one major thing which I'm sure should have been looked into.
Okay.
If all other things have been looked into, I somehow fail to understand why the onus of capital of acquisitions have been kept away from the Department of Military Affairs.
Okay.
Now, what has been stated is that the CDS will prioritize as per the defense budget given to the MOD, rightly so. But the final signature, if I can call it, or all the files will move to DG acquisition. They go out of the CDS's purview to the Defense Secretary and then to the Raksha Mantri and DAC, etc.
Okay.
So here is one thing, because all the while we have been saying that we need to get the best for whatever money is available.
Okay.
I feel that the government must look into this urgently and bring it under the DMA so that he has been given a task, he has been given a budget, he prioritizes and moves files and goes directly with the DG's acquisitions with him to the minister.
Okay, now that's a very important point you're making out there, AVM Bahadur, and I'd like to bring in General Kulkarni and Admiral Srikhande on that as well. But before that, let me bring Ajay here because Ajay, you've been patiently hearing all three gentlemen. Three belonging to three different forces, and we're talking about the integration, jointness, being the core themes. You have had your a hand on the pulse of this issue. The way the creation of CDS has been talked about over the years, and finally now that this has happened, both in terms of the mandate which the CDS has, the point which AVM Bahadur is making, and also how significant will it be when we talk about the long-term reforms?
See, first of all, let me, Vishal, break it down for your viewers. One, what the CDS, the order of the CDS, the Charter of Duties says is very clearly, before answering what you have asked, says very clearly that the CDS is tasked within 3 years, please keep in mind, within 3 years, to ensure jointness in operations, logistics, maintenance, repairs, services, communications. These are very vital words because this is the thing which is causing huge budgetary overruns. When we have separate logistics streams, and mind it, there are huge logistics streams of the forces. They run from Andaman Nicobar to Siachen to Karakoram Pass and far away to Lakshadweep and even further away in case of the Navy. There are huge communication issues. Say a helicopter of the Army Aviation Corps will not be able to talk or listen, or even on the ground, not listen to what Air Force is doing. The Rear Admiral posted in Goa cannot pick up a phone of the Navy and talk to his Army or Air Force counterpart. That is the walls they have at the moment in communication. That is causing loss to budget and also huge overruns. Prime Minister Modi has made it very clear in the past 4 years. Since 2015, he has stressed this jointness at each public meeting with the military top military brass, be it the Commanders' Conference, be it the Independence Day speech. Whenever he says, he has spoken eloquently about this aspect of jointness. What AVM Bahadur is pointing out is an aspect, but I see two aspects to it, what you have asked, that how does it bring in? See, when the DMA deals, what I'm not contesting or disputing what AVM Bahadur is saying, but what I mean to say is that possibly the MOD has created a vertical called the DMA, which is the Director of Military Affairs, or the, it is being called Military Affairs. This vertical will not interact directly with the foreign suppliers or Indian suppliers.
Okay.
So they insulate the uniformed people from the elements of industry. They are insulated. There is an insulation wall by the name of the DG acquisition, who is still there in the office of the Ministry of Defense, right? So there is no direct dealing of the uniformed brass with the industry, foreign or Indian, in terms of acquisition. That is possibly a firewall which the government has maintained.
Okay.
Now, what will happen in this case? The CDS will be part of the DAC, that is the Defense Acquisition Council. It is headed by the Minister of Defense. Minister of Defense will be heading that DAC. The CDS and the three chiefs will be sitting in that. The DG Acquisition and the Defense Secretary will also be sitting in that. To my mind, the only thing that a DG Acquisition is not with the DMA is because the government wants a kind of wall between the uniformed forces and the industrial forces, foreign or Indian. They want to keep a wall between the industry. That is my belief, is Bishop.
Okay, that's the other aspect which Ajay is pointing out. General Kulkarni?
What happens is, this exactly what Mr. Banerjee is talking about, this walls being created. The creation of CDS is primarily to bring in trust. This artificial wall, or so-called distrust between the bureaucracy and the military, is what was being talked about. It isn't there as much as what is being made out of it. However, having said that, what AVM Bahadur is talking about, the capital acquisition. Now, as CDS, he is member of the Defense Acquisition Council. He is also a member of the Defense Planning. Since he is a member of it, obviously his inputs have to be taken. The DG Acquisition has a role to play because he works under the Secretary Defense Production. So there are various things. There's a DRDO also functioning, and there's a Secretary Defense Production also working over there, and you have the DG Acquisition. Now, all these things, the CDS has an input. There is no denying the fact, the member. However, what AVM Bahadur is saying, that since the budget has been there, there's a five-year budget, there's an annual 2 years roll-on budgets that are present. So, as part of the integrated defense planning, why not give it to the department itself? That is what is contesting. However, the Ministry of Defense has an overall picture of the entire thing. We are only a Department of Military Affairs. The Department of Military Affairs is being headed by the CDS as Secretary, and therefore all matters military are being confined to the Secretary, Department of Military Affairs.
And he is the principal military advisor.
He is a principal advisor, as Admiral Shrikant is talking, whether a single point advisor or a principal advisor, whatever way you want to refer it and all, he is the advisor to the Raksha Mantri. Okay. So overall, you cannot acquire capital. However, revenue has been left entirely, of course, to the CDS, but the acquisition, which has to be common for all, and prioritization, having said, but yes, since he is a member, he has a role to play. It cannot obviously be done without the consent or concurrence of the CDS.
Okay. AVM Bahadur, I assume you want to say something, but let me first bring in Admiral Shrikande and his views on the point which you raised in terms of the acquisition aspect and the role and the mandate of the CDS there. Admiral Shrikande?
Yes, thank you. I'll take a slightly different approach to the acquisition part. One is that I think the CDS very rightly has been given the mandate for overall force planning issues, which have to be, force planning has to be linked to strategies, and including, of course, strategies for future. It's axiomatic, of course. So in terms of determining what hardware, what software, what communications, what aspects of cyber and space domains would we require for future war-fighting needs of as systems evolve, the CDS will look at force planning, and I would say that having determined force planning in a consultative manner, and as I see, the services themselves will be involved. After all this goes to the DAC. The DAC gives approval of necessity. So once the AON is is given. Thereafter, the details of negotiations, driving a hard bargain, looking at maintainability, looking at other training aspects, etc., can be left to all the other departments, including DG acquisitions, including the single service headquarters, the directorates which look after acquisition and actualization of the program. So I feel this is the right way to go. If we burden the CDS with the responsibility for actualizing the acquisitions, I think some of the problems, I would not say necessarily with the rationale of a firewall, but it is a different area of expertise which currently is with the DG acquisition and with the services headquarters, the line directorates that deal with acquisitions. I think that can be left, and that is why I go back to my earlier point that finally the CDS should really be the war-fighting advisor and executor through the joint commands, and the single services evolve to the raise, train, and sustain. In which case, of course, acquisitions would also be part of what they do.
Okay, yeah, AVM Bahadur.
You see, the point is, even now, once the AON, acceptance of necessity, is given by the DAC, the execution of the contracts is by individual services. So the issue of dealing with foreign suppliers, etc., doesn't come in the sense that there is no change. It is still the service which deals with the contract management.
Okay.
DG acquisition comes up till the time to accept acceptance of necessity, and thereafter the CNCs and all that happen. The services in any case are there. The pointed issue is that if you expect me to fight the war, I want a particular item, I need it by a particular time. This is not what has been happening till now. If there is no change in the way this is going to happen, actually who controls the purse? Just remember, the chief accountant of the Ministry of Defence, responsible to the Parliament, is the Defence Secretary. So he answers, he obviously through the Raksha Mantri.
Okay.
But here the DMA, the CDS is totally out of the budget, as he just prioritizes by 1, 2, 3 and number 9.
Okay.
But money is with somebody else.
Okay,
So
so
I feel if we don't change, that's my view.
Okay.
If we don't change this, we are in a problem.
Okay,
And
so-
just one more point, Vishal.
Yes.
The release says that there will be civilian and military officials in the Department of Military Affairs. What about the Department of Defense? That is vital. So if you're organizing the higher defense organization and DMA, certainly so, which is good. But there needs to be cross-posting of senior service officers in decision-making capability in the Department of Defense also.
Okay, that's a very interesting point, and something which again brings in the focus, the civil-military relations between the bureaucracy and the armed forces, as General Kulkarni was also pointing out. Ajay?
Yeah, actually, what AVM Bahadur has pointed out is been long talked about. The Kargil Review Committee also talked about it. There has been long talk that the cross-posting of military officers on civilian postings, like for example, why can't we have a JS Army or a JS Air from the forces? And why should we have an IAS officer who has come from some other ministry?
Okay.
This is often talked about in seminars, other places, and I agree with it that there should be a possible cross-posting. Say, why can't the JS Navy be from the Army? He knows the Navy better than the IAS officer. I'm very clear about it, very candid, and AVM Bahadur has pointed out very rightly. This should have been done at this point itself. However, we shall to take the discussion forward, very important aspects in the order yesterday, very important aspects. They talk about rationalization of resources, rationalization of manpower, right sizing, because you see world over armies are being right sized because of technology. We have been growing. At the moment, we are 1.3 million for the army alone, which is like for our country possibly bigger than what we need. That is what the talk is going on. The Sheketkar committee spoke about, that is Lieutenant General D.B. Sheketkar, he spoke about right-sizing the army by a few numbers and saving around 25,000 crores in the next 5 to 7 years. That has been implemented partially, not fully. But I personally believe that this right-sizing is one of the major mandates for the CDS. And the CDS, whoever is appointed, will have a task in his hands to pull out resources from various state services, because there is a lot of multiplicity, as I see it as an observer, especially in operations, in maintenance, logistics, a lot of multiplicity. I don't want to name it on television, but it is like huge, humongous. A few thousand crores can be saved just by merging those things.
Okay.
Vishal.
Okay, so there it is. We're running short of time, but as our guests have pointed out very clearly out there for the viewers, the role, responsibility, and the mandate of the Chief of Defence Staff, that is the CDS, a 4-star officer who will be tasked or who will be responsible for not only the integration and jointness, but also ensuring that there is a collaborative effort made by all 3 forces and there is the rationalization of